The woman's legs gave out just as the first pale fingers of dawn crept over the eastern horizon, and she pitched forward into the snowdrift with barely a sound except the soft crunch of ice crystals beneath her weight. Marigold Zelner had been walking through the darkness for 12 hours straight, her thin traveling dress offering almost no protection against the bitter February cold that had descended upon northern Arizona with unexpected fury. The blizzard had caught her halfway between the mining camp where her father had died 3 days earlier and the town of Holbrook, where her aunt supposedly lived. She had no money for a horse or wagon, no provisions except the stale bread someone had given her out of pity, and no choice but to walk the 30 miles through country that grew increasingly treacherous with each passing hour. Her fingers had gone numb around midnight. By 2 in the morning, she could no longer feel her feet inside her worn leather boots. At 4, she had stopped shivering, which some distant part of her mind recognized as a terrible sign, but she kept putting one foot in front of the other because stopping meant dying, and she refused to die at 22 years old in the middle of nowhere like her father had died in that God-forsaken silver mine. But now her body had made the decision for her. She lay face down in the snow, her dark hair spreading around her head like spilled ink, her breathing so shallow it barely disturbed the white powder beneath her nose. The sky above was beginning to lighten from black to deep purple, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out as it took flight. That was when Zachary Irving found her. He had been riding since before dawn, checking on the line shacks scattered across the ranch where he worked as foreman. The unexpected storm had worried his boss, concerned that the cattle might drift too far seeking shelter, or that one of the hands staying in the remote cabins might need assistance. Zachary had volunteered to make the rounds, partly because it was his job, and partly because he never minded a reason to be alone on the range with just his horse and his thoughts. He almost missed her entirely. The snow had begun covering her prone form, and if not for the dark contrast of her hair against the white landscape, he might have ridden right past. But something caught his eye, and he reined in his buckskin gelding, squinting through the gray morning light at what he had initially taken for a fallen branch or dead animal. Then he saw her hand, pale fingers curled slightly in the snow, and his heart lurched in his chest. Lord Almighty, he breathed, swinging down from his saddle before his horse had fully stopped. He dropped to his knees beside her and carefully turned her over, brushing snow from her face with his gloved hands. She was beautiful, even half frozen, with fine features and long lashes dark against her pale cheeks. But more importantly, when he pressed his fingers against her throat, he felt a pulse, weak and slow. "But there, can you hear me?" he asked, knowing she probably could not. Her eyes remained closed, her lips tinged blue. He had seen hypothermia before, had watched a fellow ranch hand die from it his first winter in Arizona, when the man had gotten drunk and passed out in the snow. The memory spurred him into action. The nearest line shack was only a quarter-mile west, a small cabin kept stocked with basic supplies for exactly this kind of situation. Zachary gathered the woman into his arms, alarmed at how light she felt, how cold her body was, even through her dress and his coat. He managed to get her situated in front of his saddle, holding her against his chest with one arm while he guided his horse with the other. The gelding seemed to sense the urgency and moved at a swift walk, carefully picking his way through the snow-covered terrain. Zachary kept talking to the unconscious woman, telling her to hold on, promising her warmth and safety, though he had no idea if she could hear any of it. The line shack appeared through the swirling snow like a miracle, its rough wooden walls and stone chimney exactly what he needed to see. He dismounted in front of it, once again gathering the woman in his arms. She made a small sound, the first indication that some part of her was still fighting, still aware. "That is right," he said encouragingly. "You stay with me now. We are almost there." The door was not locked because nobody locked doors this far from town. He shouldered it open and carried her inside, grateful to be out of the wind, even though the interior was barely warmer than outside. The shack was a single room with an iron stove, a narrow bed frame with a thin mattress, a rough table with 2 chairs and shelves holding canned goods, coffee, and other supplies. Zachary laid the woman on the bed and immediately turned his attention to the stove. Fortunately, there was kindling and wood already prepared, and he had the fire going within minutes. While it began to take the edge off the cold air, he returned to the woman and began the delicate process of removing her wet clothes. He tried to be respectful about it, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while still doing what needed to be done. Her dress was soaked through and half frozen, her undergarments the same. He found blankets in a wooden chest and wrapped her in them, then hung her clothes near the stove to dry. Her boots were worse than he expected, falling apart at the seams, and he wondered how far she had walked in them. Once she was bundled in every blanket he could find, Zachary built up the fire until it was roaring. The small shack began to warm quickly, and he rubbed the woman's hands and feet gently, trying to restore circulation without causing damage. He had heard that warming someone too quickly could be as dangerous as the cold itself, so he was careful, methodical. After perhaps 20 minutes, her eyelids began to flutter. Her breathing, which had been so shallow, deepened slightly. Encouraged, Zachary kept working, kept talking to her in a low, steady voice. "That is it. You are safe now. There is a fire going, and you are warming up. Can you open your eyes for me?" It took several more minutes, but finally her eyes opened. They were gray, he noticed, the color of storm clouds, and currently filled with confusion and fear. "Where?" she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "You are in a line shack about 5 miles west of Holbrook," Zachary told her, relief flooding through him at the sound of her voice. "I am Zachary Irving. I found you collapsed in the snow. You are safe now. What is your name?" "Marigold," she said, and then her eyes rolled back, and she lost consciousness again. Zachary's heart jumped with alarm, but when he checked her pulse, it was stronger than before. She had simply slipped back into sleep, her body exhausted from its ordeal. He decided to let her rest, continuing to monitor her breathing and color as the fire warmed the small space. He took care of his horse, bringing the gelding into the small lean to attach to the back of the shack and giving him grain and water. Then he returned inside and set about making coffee and heating some beans. He was hungry, and the woman would need food when she woke. It was nearly noon when her eyes opened again, and this time they stayed open. She looked around the cabin with more awareness, taking in the fire, the drying clothes, and finally Zachary himself, who sat in one of the chairs he had pulled close to the bed. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Cold," she said. "But better, I think. My hands hurt." "That is good, actually. Means the feeling is coming back. Do your feet hurt too?" She shifted beneath the blankets and nodded. "Yes, everything hurts. I am sorry about that, but it is better than the alternative." He stood and poured coffee into a tin cup, adding sugar from the supplies. "Can you sit up? You should drink something warm." With his help, Marigold managed to push herself into a sitting position, keeping the blankets wrapped around herself. She accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. Zachary noticed her hands were shaking. "Take small sips," he advised. "Not too fast." She obeyed, and as the hot liquid slid down her throat, she felt warmth beginning to spread through her chest. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she said after a moment. "You saved my life." "Just happened to be in the right place," Zachary said, though he knew that was not entirely true. If he had decided to check the northern line shacks first, instead of the western ones, or if he had left an hour later, she would have died in that snow. "Where were you coming from?" he asked. "Holbrook is the only town for miles, and you were walking away from it." Marigold's expression darkened. "No, I was walking toward it. I started from a mining camp to the northeast. My father died there, and I had nowhere else to go. Someone told me I had an aunt in Holbrook, my mother's sister." "You walked from a mining camp? That is 30 miles at least." "I had no money for a horse, no money for anything." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. I had been walking all night. I thought I could make it. Zachary studied her face, seeing the grief there beneath the exhaustion. I am sorry about your father. What happened? Cave in at the mine. He was killed instantly, they said. They gave me a day to clear out of the company housing. The bitterness in her voice was sharp. Very charitable of them. That is a rough hand to be dealt. Zachary poured himself coffee and sat back down. This aunt in Holbrook. Do you know her name? Where she lives? Margaret Zimmerman. But I have never met her. My mother died when I was young, and my father and I moved around too much for family connections. I am not even certain she will remember me. Zimmerman, Zachary repeated, thinking. Name does not sound familiar, but I do not know everyone in town. Holbrook is not huge, but it is big enough. We will find her. We? Marigold looked at him with surprise. You did not think I was going to leave you out here, did you? He gave her a small smile. Soon as the storm clears and you are strong enough to travel, I will take you into town. But that will not be today. You need rest, and this storm is not done yet. As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind rattled the shack's single window, and snow pelted against the glass. Marigold had not even noticed the storm was still raging outside. The fire and the walls made it seem distant, unimportant. I cannot impose on you, she started to say, but Zachary waved off her protest. You are not imposing. This is my job, more or less. I am foreman at the Double Bar Ranch, and these line shacks are here for situations exactly like this. Besides, you would not make it 5 miles in your condition, and I would not feel right about myself if I left you here alone. Marigold did not have the strength to argue, and truthfully she was grateful for his presence. The thought of being alone in this small cabin while the storm raged outside was terrifying. Are you hungry? Zachary asked. I have beans warming, and there is hardtack and some dried beef. Yes, she admitted. I have not eaten since yesterday morning. He served her a plate of beans and a piece of hardtack, and though the food was simple and plain, Marigold ate like it was a feast. Zachary ate as well, and they sat in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds, the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. When they had finished eating, Zachary checked on her clothes. The dress was still damp, but getting drier. Another few hours, and these should be good to wear again, he said. Though I have to say, that dress is not much protection against cold like this. It is the only one I have, Marigold said quietly. Everything else was left behind at the mining camp. I only had time to grab a few things. Zachary felt a surge of anger at the men who had thrown a grieving young woman out with so little time or compassion, but he kept it off his face. Well, when we get to Holbrook, we will see about getting you something warmer. For now, you should rest more. Your body has been through a terrible ordeal. What about you? You must be tired too. I am used to long hours in rough conditions. You let me worry about that. He pulled the blanket up higher around her shoulders. Sleep. I will keep the fire going and wake you if anything changes. Marigold wanted to protest, wanted to stay awake and talk more to this man who had saved her life. But exhaustion was pulling at her like an undertow. Her eyes drifted closed almost against her will, and within moments she was asleep. Zachary watched her for a moment, struck again by how lovely she was, and how vulnerable. He was 28 years old, and had seen his share of hardship and suffering in the 6 years since he had come west from Missouri. But something about this young woman's situation touched him deeply. Maybe it was the determination it must have taken to walk 30 miles through the night. Maybe it was the loneliness he recognized in her eyes, a loneliness that matched his own. He shook off such thoughts and busied himself with maintaining the fire and checking supplies. The storm continued throughout the afternoon, sometimes easing to a light snowfall and sometimes picking up into a near whiteout. Zachary went out twice to check on his horse and bring in more firewood from the covered stack outside, but otherwise he remained in the warm cabin, reading an old newspaper someone had left behind and occasionally dozing in his chair. Marigold slept until evening, and when she woke, she seemed much improved. Her color was better, and her eyes were clearer. She sat up on her own this time, still wrapped in blankets. "How long did I sleep?" she asked. "Several hours. It is near supper time now." Zachary had opened a can of stew and was heating it on the stove. "How are you feeling?" "Much better." "Still tired and sore, but better." She glanced toward the window, where darkness was already falling. "Is the storm still going?" "Yes, but not as bad as earlier. Should blow itself out overnight, I expect. Come morning, we can head to town if you are up for it." "I will be up for it," Marigold said with determination. "I have taken enough of your time already." "Time I was happy to give." Zachary stirred the stew. "Besides, I do not mind the company. Gets lonesome out here sometimes." "Do you live out here? In these line shacks?" "No, I have a cabin at the main ranch, about 10 miles southeast of Holbrook, but I spend plenty of nights in these shacks during the winter, checking on cattle and making sure the hands at the far reaches of the range are doing all right." He poured stew into 2 bowls and handed her one. "Been doing this work for 4 years now." "Do you like it?" Marigold asked, curious about this quiet man who had saved her life. Zachary considered the question. "I do. It is honest work, and I am good at it. The owner of the double bar, Mr. Patterson, is a fair man. He treats his workers right, pays on time, does not ask more than is reasonable. I have worked for worse." "Where are you from originally?" "Missouri, little town called Liberty, outside Kansas City. My family had a farm there, but after my parents died, there was not enough land to divide among all us kids. I am the youngest of 4, so I decided to head west and make my own way." "Do you miss it?" "Missouri? Sometimes. I miss my brothers and sister. But this land has gotten into my blood, I think. Could not imagine going back east now." He ate a spoonful of stew. "What about you? Where did you grow up?" "Everywhere and nowhere," Marigold said with a sad smile. "My father was always chasing the next big strike. We lived in mining camps all over Colorado and New Mexico and Arizona. Never stayed anywhere long enough for it to feel like home. That must have been hard." "It was lonely," she admitted. "Especially after my mother died. I was only 8. After that, it was just me and my father, and he was so focused on finding silver or gold or whatever else he was convinced was just around the next corner. He was a dreamer, always sure the next mine would make us rich. I take it that never happened? No. We were poor my whole life. He died poor, still dreaming." She set down her bowl, her appetite suddenly gone. "I loved him, but I was also angry at him for never being able to settle, to be satisfied with what we had. And now he is gone, and I cannot tell him any of that." Zachary heard the pain in her voice and wished he could offer more than words. "For what it is worth, I am sure he knew you loved him. And he probably knew you were angry too. Parents usually do." "Maybe." Marigold wiped at her eyes with the corner of the blanket. "I am sorry. You did not sign up to listen to me weep about my troubles. I do not mind. Sometimes it helps to talk about things." He paused, then added, "And you have had a hell of a few days. You are allowed to cry." That simple permission, offered with such kindness, made fresh tears spill down Marigold's cheeks. She cried quietly, and Zachary let her, understanding that she needed to release the grief and fear and exhaustion she had been holding inside. When she had cried herself out, he handed her a handkerchief and poured her more coffee. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire. "What will you do if you cannot find your aunt?" Zachary asked eventually. "Do you have any other family?" "No one. If my aunt is not in Holbrook, or if she will not take me in, then I suppose I will have to find work. I can clean, cook, sew. Maybe someone in town will hire me." Zachary nodded slowly. Holbrook was a railroad town, a crossroads of sorts, with enough commerce that jobs could be found. But he knew it was not easy for a young woman alone, with no money and no references. "We will figure it out," he said, "one step at a time." The certainty in his voice comforted Marigold more than she could express. This stranger had already saved her life and now was promising to help her further, asking nothing in return. It was more kindness than she had known in years. They talked more as the evening wore on, sharing stories about their lives. Zachary told her about learning to work with cattle, about the time a rattlesnake spooked his horse and he got thrown into a creek, about the characters who worked at the double bar. Marigold told him about the places she had lived, about a pet dog she had loved as a child, about learning to make bread from a kind woman in a Colorado mining camp. As the night deepened, Zachary insisted Marigold take the bed again while he made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire. She protested, but he would not hear of it. "You are still recovering," he said firmly. "I have slept on harder ground than this plenty of times. Now get some rest. We have a ride ahead of us tomorrow." Marigold settled back into the bed, warm and safe in a way she had not felt in longer than she could remember. As she drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was that Zachary Irving was unlike any man she had ever met. Morning dawned clear and cold, the storm finally blown out. Zachary was up before first light, building up the fire and making coffee. When Marigold woke, her dress was dry and waiting for her, and Zachary had politely turned his back to give her privacy to change. They ate a quick breakfast of hardtack and coffee, then prepared for the journey to Holbrook. Zachary had only one horse, so Marigold would have to ride with him, but the gelding was strong and the distance was not far. "You ever ridden before?" Zachary asked as he saddled the horse. "A little, but not much. My father could never afford to keep a horse for long." "You will be fine. I will make sure you do not fall." He swung into the saddle, then reached down to help her up. She settled in front of him, sitting sideways, and he wrapped one arm around her waist to steady her. The contact made Marigold's heart beat faster, and she was acutely aware of his warmth at her back, his strength surrounding her. She told herself it was simple gratitude, nothing more, but she could not quite convince herself of that. They rode through a landscape transformed by snow. Everything was white and pristine, beautiful in the morning sunlight. The temperature was still well below freezing, but without the wind it was bearable, especially pressed close to Zachary as she was. They talked as they rode, continuing the easy conversation from the night before. Zachary pointed out landmarks, telling her about the country they were passing through. Marigold found herself fascinated by his knowledge of the land, the way he read the terrain and sky with practiced ease. "There," Zachary said after about an hour of riding. "That is Holbrook." Marigold looked ahead and saw buildings rising from the snowy plain. Holbrook was bigger than she had expected, a real town with a main street lined with businesses, not just another rough mining camp. She felt hope stir in her chest. As they rode into town, people stared at them with open curiosity. A man and woman riding together like that, the woman clearly in borrowed clothes too big for her, was bound to cause talk. Zachary ignored the stares and headed straight for the general store. "If anyone knows where your aunt lives, it will be the Parkers who run this place," he explained, helping Marigold down from the horse. "They know everyone in town." Inside the store, a middle-aged woman behind the counter looked up with a smile that turned to surprise when she saw Marigold's condition. "Zachary Irving, what have you gotten yourself into?" she asked, her tone more amused than judgmental. "Morning, Mrs. Parker. This is Miss Marigold Zelner. I found her half frozen in the snow yesterday, and she is looking for her aunt, Margaret Zimmerman. Do you know her?" "Mrs." Parker's expression turned sympathetic. "Oh, you poor dear. Yes, I knew Margaret Zimmerman. But I am afraid I have bad news. She passed away last autumn, not 3 months ago. Fever took her." Marigold felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Her one hope, her only plan, gone. She swayed slightly, and Zachary's hand came to her elbow, steadying her. "Are you certain?" Marigold asked, her voice hollow. "I am afraid so. I am so sorry, dear." Were you close to her? No, I never met her. She was my mother's sister. I was hoping she might take me in. Mrs. Parker's face softened with pity. You have nowhere else to go? No one. The older woman looked at Zachary, then back at Marigold. Well, now, let us not panic. Holbrook takes care of its own, and we will figure something out. Are you looking for work? Yes, anything. I can clean, cook, sew, keep accounts. I might know of something, Mrs. Parker said thoughtfully. Mrs. Henderson, who runs the boarding house, has been complaining that she needs help now that her rheumatism is acting up. Room and board plus a small wage. Would that interest you? Yes, Marigold said immediately. Very much. Let me send my husband to fetch her. You just wait here a moment. Mrs. Parker disappeared into the back room, calling for her husband. Zachary guided Marigold to a chair near the stove. You all right? I think so. I was counting on my aunt being here, but you are right, we will figure it out. At least there might be work. And even if this boarding house position does not work out, there are other options. Holbrook is a good town. People here will help. His confidence bolstered her, and she managed a small smile. You have done so much for me already. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not owe me anything. I did what anyone would do. No, Marigold said firmly. Not everyone would have stopped, would have cared. You did, and I will not forget it. Before Zachary could respond, Mrs. Parker returned with her husband, who hurried out to find Mrs. Henderson. While they waited, Mrs. Parker insisted on giving Marigold a warm shawl and a pair of gloves, refusing payment. Consider it a welcome to Holbrook, she said kindly. Within 20 minutes, Mrs. Henderson arrived. She was a stout woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She looked Marigold up and down appraisingly. Sarah tells me you are looking for work and have nowhere to stay, she said without preamble. Yes, madam. My father died a few days ago, and I was traveling here to find my aunt, but I just learned she passed away. I am a hard worker, and I will do whatever is needed. You look half-starved and exhausted. When did you last have a decent meal? Well, not in some time. Mrs. Henderson made a disapproving sound. Room and board plus $3 a week. You will help with cleaning, laundry, cooking, and serving meals. I run a respectable establishment, so I expect proper behavior at all times. No drinking, no men in your room. Church on Sundays. Understood? Yes, madam. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how much work it is. But there was a hint of humor in Mrs. Henderson's stern face. Come along, then. Let us get you settled and fed properly. Marigold stood, then turned to Zachary. There was so much she wanted to say, but the words caught in her throat. Thank you, she finally managed, for everything. You are welcome, and I am in town fairly often, so I will check in on you. Make sure you are settling in all right. The thought of seeing him again made her heart lift. I would like that. Their eyes met and held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat pointedly, and the spell broke. Come along, girl. I do not have all day. Marigold followed Mrs. Henderson out of the store, glancing back once to see Zachary watching her with an expression she could not quite read. The boarding house was a two-story building on a side street, neat and well-maintained. Mrs. Henderson showed Marigold to a small room on the second floor with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a washstand. It is not much, but it is clean and warm, Mrs. Henderson said. You will share the bathing room with the other girls who work here. Speaking of which, you need a bath and some proper clothes before you do anything else. I will have one of the others bring up hot water, and I think I have a spare dress that might fit you with a little altering. Marigold looked around the simple room and felt tears prick her eyes. Just 2 days ago, she had been homeless and hopeless. Now she had shelter, work, and a future, however uncertain, and she had Zachary to thank for all of it. Over the next few weeks, Marigold settled into her new life in Holbrook. The work at the boarding house was hard, just as Mrs. Henderson had warned, but it was honest, and Marigold threw herself into it with determination. She rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, spent her days cleaning rooms and doing laundry and running errands, and often did not finish until late in the evening. But she did not complain. She had a roof over her head, food in her belly, and a few dollars each week that she carefully saved in a tin under her bed. More than that, she had purpose and the beginning of a community. The other women who worked at the boarding house, Mary and Nell, were friendly and welcoming. The boarders were a mix of railroad workers, merchants passing through, and a few permanent residents, and most of them treated her with respect. And true to his word, Zachary came to town every week or so, and he always made a point of stopping by the boarding house. At first, his visits were brief, just checking to make sure Marigold was doing well, but gradually they grew longer, and he began timing his trips to town to coincide with Marigold's free time on Sunday afternoons. They would walk together along the edges of town, talking about everything and nothing. Zachary told her more about his work at the Double Bar, about the cattle drives, and the challenges of ranching in this harsh country. Marigold told him about the boarders and Mrs. Henderson's gruff kindness, about the friends she was making in town. What they did not talk about, at least not directly, were the feelings growing between them. But those feelings were there nonetheless, in the way Zachary's eyes lit up when he saw her, in the way Marigold found herself watching for his arrival, in the careful way they avoided touching except by accident, as if they both knew that any deliberate contact might unleash something neither was quite ready to face. Spring came early that year, the snow melting by mid-March, and the desert beginning to bloom with wildflowers. On a Sunday in late March, Zachary arrived at the boarding house with a small bouquet of the desert blooms, yellow and orange and bright red. "I thought you might like these," he said, almost shyly, handing them to Marigold. "They are beautiful," she said, touched by the gesture. "Thank you." "I was thinking," Zachary said as they began their usual walk, "that maybe we could ride out to the ranch next week. If you have a day off, I mean. I would like to show you the place, and Mr. Patterson has been saying he wants to meet you after I've talked about you so much." Marigold felt her cheeks warm. "You have been talking about me?" "Well, I had to explain why I was coming to town so often. The boys were starting to tease me about it." He grinned. "Not that I minded. I would love to see the ranch," Marigold said. "Mrs. Henderson has been saying I am due for a day off. Let me ask her about next Saturday." Mrs. Henderson not only gave her permission, she also gave Marigold a knowing look that made it clear she understood exactly what was happening between her young employee and the handsome foreman who kept coming around. The following Saturday dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring day. Zachary arrived mid-morning with his horse and a gentle mare he had borrowed for Marigold. He had also brought proper riding clothes for her, a split skirt and boots that he had somehow determined would fit her. "Where did you get these?" Marigold asked, surprised and touched. "I asked Mrs. Parker at the store for help. I told her they were a gift, and she knew your size from when she fitted you for that dress last month." He looked suddenly uncertain. "I hope you do not mind. I thought you might be more comfortable in proper riding clothes." "Mind? Zachary, this is incredibly thoughtful. Thank you." She went inside to change, and when she emerged in the riding clothes, Zachary's expression made her feel beautiful. They rode out of town heading southeast, toward the mountains visible in the distance. The land was gorgeous in the spring morning, the desert alive with color, and the air sweet with the scent of sage and creosote. Zachary was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, as he helped Marigold improve her riding skills. By the time they reached the Double Bar Ranch an hour later, she was feeling much more confident in the saddle. The ranch was impressive, a sprawling operation with multiple outbuildings, extensive corrals, and a large main house. Zachary took her first to meet Mr. Patterson, the owner, who turned out to be a white-haired man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "So you are the young lady Zachary saved from the snow," Mr. Patterson said. "Welcome to the Double Bar. Any friend of Zachary's is welcome here." "Thank you, sir. You have a beautiful ranch." It is a lot of work, but worth it. Zachary here is a big part of why it runs so smoothly. Best foreman I have ever had. Zachary looked embarrassed by the praise. I just do my job, sir. After visiting with Mr. Patterson for a while, Zachary showed Marigold around the ranch. He introduced her to the other hands, showed her the cattle in the near pastures, took her to see the barn where they kept the horses. Everyone they met was friendly, and Marigold could tell they respected Zachary. Finally, he brought her to his cabin, a small but well-built structure set a little apart from the main buildings. Inside it was neat and spare, with simple furniture and few decorations, but it felt like a home in a way the boarding house room never quite had. This is where you live? Marigold asked, looking around with interest. Yes, it is not much, but it is mine. Well, comes with the job, but still. First place that has really felt like my own. Marigold could understand that feeling. I like it. It suits you. They had lunch at the main house, Mrs. Patterson proving to be as welcoming as her husband. The food was delicious, far better than the simple fare at the boarding house, and Marigold enjoyed the lively conversation around the table. After lunch, Zachary suggested they ride a bit farther to a place he wanted to show her. They rode for another half hour, climbing into the foothills until they reached a spot where the land opened up to reveal a stunning view of the valley below. This is one of my favorite places, Zachary said as they dismounted. I come here sometimes when I need to think. I can see why it is breathtaking. They sat on a flat rock, looking out over the landscape. For a while they were quiet, just enjoying the view and each other's presence. Marigold, Zachary finally said, his voice serious. I need to tell you something. She turned to look at him, her heart suddenly beating faster. What is it? I have been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to figure out the right time and the right words. He took a deep breath. The truth is, I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. I think I started falling for you that first day when I found you in the snow, and every time I have seen you since, those feelings have just gotten stronger. Marigold felt joy and relief flood through her. Zachary, I feel the same way. I was afraid to say anything, afraid that maybe you were just being kind, that you did not feel what I was feeling. Oh, I feel it, he said, reaching out to take her hand. I feel it every time I see you, every time I think about you, which is pretty much all the time lately. She laced her fingers through his, marveling at how right it felt. What do we do now? Well, I was hoping I could court you properly. With your permission, of course, and Mrs. Henderson's, since she is sort of your guardian at the moment. I want to do this right, Marigold. You deserve that. I would like that very much. She smiled at him, feeling happier than she had in years, maybe ever. Zachary raised their joined hands and kissed her knuckles gently. You have made me the happiest man in Arizona right now. They stayed on the hilltop for another hour, talking about the future, making plans. Zachary wanted to give their courtship proper time, to let Marigold settle fully into her new life before rushing into anything. Marigold agreed, though part of her wanted to throw caution aside and let herself fall completely into these feelings. When they finally rode back to town that evening, everything had changed between them. They were no longer just friends, no longer dancing around their attraction. They were courting, officially, and everyone who saw them together could see the happiness radiating from them both. Mrs. Henderson gave her approval with a stern warning to Zachary that he had better treat her girl right or answer to her. Zachary promised solemnly that he would, and Marigold had to hide a smile at seeing this strong, capable man intimidated by the boarding house matron. Over the next several months, their courtship progressed beautifully. Zachary came to town every week, sometimes twice a week, always bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a pretty ribbon, a book he thought she might enjoy. They attended church socials together, went on picnics, took long rides into the countryside. Marigold bloomed under the attention and the happiness. She gained weight, her face filling out, and her eyes losing the haunted look they had carried when Zachary first found her. She made friends in town, became a valued member of the community. Mrs. Henderson came to rely on her more and more, eventually putting her in charge of managing the boarding house accounts. By summer, everyone in Holbrook knew that Zachary Irving and Marigold Zelner were a matched pair, and speculation began about when he would propose. Zachary knew exactly when he wanted to propose. He had been planning it for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came in late August, on the anniversary of the day he had found her in the snow, though of course the weather could not have been more different. He took her back to the hilltop, where he had first told her his feelings, this time with a picnic lunch prepared by Mrs. Patterson. They ate and talked and enjoyed the summer afternoon. And when the time felt right, Zachary reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Marigold Zelner, he said, dropping to one knee on the sun-warmed rock. 6 months ago, you came into my life in the most dramatic way possible, half frozen and barely alive. But from that first moment, you have been changing my life in ways I never expected. You have shown me what it means to be strong, to face hardship with courage and grace. You have made me laugh, made me think, made me want to be a better man. I love you more than I have ever loved anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much. Will you marry me? Tears were streaming down Marigold's face as she looked at him kneeling before her, this good man who had saved her life in more ways than one. Yes, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I will marry you. Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond, and then he stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her for the first time. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, of all the feelings they had been holding back for months. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marigold laughed with pure joy. I love you, Zachary Irving. I love you too, Marigold. I always will. They were married in October, in a simple ceremony at the church in Holbrook, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Marigold wore a dress made by the local seamstress, white with lace trim, and carried a bouquet of fall wildflowers. Zachary wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous, and happier than anyone had ever seen him. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson hosted a reception at the ranch, with food and music and dancing that went on until late in the evening. When Zachary and Marigold finally left the party, heading to the cabin that would now be their home, they were both exhausted and exhilarated. Their first night together was tender and sweet, both of them a little nervous, but so full of love for each other that it felt natural and right. Afterward, lying in Zachary's arms in their bed, Marigold thought back to that terrible night she had spent walking through the snow, certain she was going to die alone and forgotten. What are you thinking about? Zachary asked, running his fingers through her hair. About how different my life is now compared to a year ago. How lucky I am that you found me. I am the lucky one, Zachary said. You gave me something I did not even know I was missing. A reason to come home at the end of the day. Someone to build a future with. We are both lucky then. They fell asleep, wrapped around each other. The first night of their marriage. The first night of their new life together. The first year of their marriage was an adjustment, as all first years are, but it was also wonderful. Marigold loved being a ranch wife, loved the rhythm of the days and seasons, loved making a home in their little cabin. She learned to cook properly, beyond the simple meals she had prepared at the boarding house. She planted a garden in the spring, growing vegetables and herbs. She became friends with the other ranch wives and with Mrs. Patterson, who treated her like a daughter. Zachary was a devoted husband, attentive and affectionate. He still worked long hours at the ranch, but he always made time for Marigold, always made her feel like she was his priority. They talked about everything, shared their thoughts and dreams and fears with each other in a way neither had ever done with anyone else. In the spring of their second year together, Marigold discovered she was pregnant. She told Zachary over dinner one evening, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment, he just stared at her, processing the news. Then a huge smile broke across his face. Truly? We are having a baby? Truly. I saw the doctor in town yesterday, and he confirmed it. I am about 2 months along, which means the baby should come in late October. Zachary was around the table in an instant, pulling her into his arms and spinning her around, making her laugh. This is the best news. We are going to be parents. We are, Marigold said, happiness bubbling up inside her. Are you happy? Happy? I am over the moon. We are going to have a family, Marigold. Our own family. The pregnancy was not easy. Marigold suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first 3 months, and the summer heat made her uncomfortable and tired. But Zachary was endlessly patient and supportive, taking over more of the household chores and making sure she rested as much as possible. Their son was born on a cool October evening, arriving quickly and with surprisingly little fuss. Zachary paced outside the cabin while Mrs. Patterson and the midwife attended to Marigold, and when he finally heard his son's first cry, he burst into tears of relief and joy. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the cabin with a smile. You have a healthy baby boy, and your wife is doing fine. Come meet your son. Zachary practically ran inside, finding Marigold propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with so much love in her eyes that his breath caught. Meet our son, she said softly. Zachary sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the impossibly small face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had dark hair like his mother and was making little snuffling sounds, his eyes closed. He is perfect, Zachary whispered. You are amazing. Thank you for this gift. They named him Zachary Matthew Irving, after his father and Marigold's father, whose middle name had been Matthew. Little Zach, as they called him, was a good baby, healthy and strong. Watching Zachary with their son, seeing the gentleness and love with which he held and cared for the tiny infant, made Marigold fall in love with her husband all over again. The months after Zach's birth were exhausting, but joyful. Marigold was tired all the time from the demands of nursing and caring for a newborn, but she had never been happier. Their little cabin felt like the center of the universe, and everything she needed was within its walls. Zachary was a hands-on father, changing diapers and walking the floor with Zach when he was fussy and singing off-key lullabies that made Marigold smile. He adjusted his work schedule so he could be home more, and Mr. Patterson, who had become like a father to them both, was understanding and supportive. As Zach grew from infant to baby to toddler, the cabin began to feel smaller. One evening when Zach was about 18 months old, Zachary brought up the subject of building a bigger house. We are going to need more room, especially if we have more children, he said. And I have been saving money. I talked to Mr. Patterson, and he said he would give us a plot of land, not just the cabin that comes with the job. We could build our own place, something that would really be ours. Marigold loved the idea, and they spent many evenings that winter planning their future home. Zachary drew up plans, consulting with the carpenter in town, and by spring, they were ready to begin construction. Building the house took all summer, with Zachary and several of the ranch hands working on it during their free time. It was a modest house by some standards, but to Marigold it was a palace, 2 stories, with a proper kitchen, a sitting room, 3 bedrooms, and even a small room that could serve as a study or sewing room. They moved in that fall, and Marigold spent happy weeks making the new house into a home, hanging curtains she had sewn, arranging furniture, setting up the kitchen exactly how she wanted it. 2 months after they moved in, she discovered she was pregnant again. Their daughter was born the following summer, a beautiful baby girl with Zachary's blue eyes and Marigold's dark hair. They named her Emma Grace. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Zachary continued to work as foreman of the double bar, a job he was excellent at and deeply satisfied by. Marigold managed their home and raised their children, finding fulfillment in the daily tasks of cooking and cleaning and caring for her family. But she also maintained her own interests, doing the bookkeeping for the ranch in addition to their household accounts, and occasionally helping Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house when extra hands were needed. The years passed quickly. full of the small joys and occasional challenges of family life. Zach grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Emma was more outgoing, chatty, and curious about everything. Marigold and Zachary navigated the ups and downs of parenthood together, supporting each other through sleepless nights and childhood illnesses, and all the thousand small crises that come with raising children. When Zach was 8 and Emma was 5, Marigold gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named Thomas. By then, they had been married for 9 years, and their love had deepened and matured into something even more precious than those first passionate feelings. They knew each other completely, understood each other's moods and needs without words, functioned as a true partnership in every sense. Through it all, they never forgot how they had come together. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Zachary had found Marigold in the snow, they marked it privately as their own special day. Sometimes they would ride out to the hilltop where he had proposed, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson. Sometimes they would simply sit together after the children were in bed, holding hands and remembering how close they had come to never meeting at all. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had checked the northern line shacks first that day?" Zachary asked one such anniversary evening when they had been married for 12 years. "I try not to," Marigold admitted. "It terrifies me to think that I might have died out there in the snow, or that someone else might have found me and we never would have met. But I did find you, and we did meet, and look at what we have built together." Zachary gestured to their home, to the children sleeping upstairs, to the life they had created. "We have been so blessed," Marigold agreed. "There were times in those early years before I met you when I thought I would never have this. A home, a family, someone who loved me. I had given up hoping for it. I had not quite given up, but I was starting to think I might never find the right person. Then there you were, half buried in a snowdrift, and somehow I knew. Even then, I think I knew you were going to change everything." Marigold leaned her head on his shoulder. "I love you more now than I did the day we married. I did not think that was possible, but it is. I know what you mean. Every year, every day with you, I fall a little deeper. You are the best part of my life, Marigold. You and our children." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, grateful for what they had and for the chance encounter in a snowstorm that had brought them together. As the children grew older, the rhythm of ranch life became their normal. Zach, showing his father's natural ability with cattle and horses, began working alongside Zachary regularly by the time he was 12. Emma developed a love of books and learning, and Marigold spent hours reading with her and helping her study. Thomas, the baby, was adventurous and fearless, always climbing things he should not and getting into mild trouble. Mr. Patterson, now in his 80s, began talking about retiring and selling the ranch. The news caused some concern among the ranch hands and their families, worried about whether a new owner would keep them on. But Mr. Patterson surprised everyone by offering to sell the ranch to Zachary at a very fair price, with terms that made it possible for him to buy it. "You have run this place as much as I have for the last 15 years, Mr. Patterson told Zachary. "I cannot think of anyone I would rather see take it over. You have earned this, son." It was a huge decision, one that Zachary and Marigold discussed at length. Owning the ranch would mean more responsibility, more financial risk, but it also meant security for their family and the opportunity to build something lasting that they could pass on to their children. In the end, they decided to do it. Zachary bought the Double Bar Ranch, and at age 42, he went from foreman to owner. It was a transition that came with challenges, but Zachary proved more than equal to them. The ranch continued to thrive under his ownership, and he treated his workers with the same fairness and respect that Mr. Patterson had shown. Marigold found herself taking on more responsibilities as well, managing the ranch accounts and often serving as a liaison between Zachary and the workers' families. She discovered she had a head for business and enjoyed the work, finding satisfaction in helping the ranch succeed. Their children grew into young adults. Zach, now 20, was being groomed to eventually take over the ranch from his father. He was steady and reliable, much like Zachary, and showed every sign of being an excellent rancher. Emma, 17, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher. Marigold and Zachary supported her ambition, arranging for her to attend a teaching college in Flagstaff. Thomas, at 13, was still figuring out his path, but showed an interest in horses that suggested he might become a horse trainer. Through all the years and changes, one thing remained constant: the love between Marigold and Zachary. They had built a life together from nothing, starting with that desperate moment in the snow when their paths had crossed. They had created a family, a home, a legacy. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Marigold with a trip back to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. They rode out on a cool October day, the landscape gold and red with fall colors, so different from that snow-covered morning. "I wanted to see it again," Zachary explained as they stood looking at the now familiar terrain. "The place where everything began. It does not look very dramatic in daylight, does it?" Marigold observed. "Hard to believe this ordinary patch of ground was where my life changed forever. Nothing ordinary about it to me. This is where I found my whole world." Zachary pulled her close, kissing her forehead. 20 years, and I love you more every single day." 20 years of happiness," Marigold agreed. "More than I ever dreamed of having. You gave me that, Zachary. You saved me in that snow, but you kept saving me every day after. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up smiling. We saved each other, I think. You gave me purpose, gave me something to work for beyond just getting by, made me want to build something lasting." They stood together in the place where their story had begun, looking out over the land that was now theirs, thinking about the family waiting for them at home, grateful for every moment that had led them to this point. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and occasional sorrows. Mr. Patterson passed away at 86, mourned by everyone who had known him. Mrs. Henderson died at 78, and Marigold wept at her funeral, remembering how the stern but kind woman had given her a chance when she had nothing. Mrs. Patterson lived to be 92, long enough to see her beloved ranch thriving under Zachary's ownership and to know all of Zachary and Marigold's grandchildren, because there were grandchildren eventually. Zach married a local girl named Sarah and gave them 3 grandchildren. Emma became a teacher as she had dreamed, taught for several years, then married a fellow teacher and had twin daughters. Thomas did indeed become a horse trainer, traveling for several years before settling back at the ranch with a wife he met in California and their son. Marigold and Zachary grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements becoming slower. But the love between them never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren at a celebration held at the ranch, Zachary stood to make a toast. "50 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known," he said, his voice still strong despite his 78 years. "She came into my life when I found her collapsed in the snow, more dead than alive, and I am so grateful that I was in the right place at that exact moment. Everything good in my life flows from that day. Our children, our grandchildren, this ranch, the life we have built together. Marigold, you are my heart, my home, my everything. Here is to 50 more years." Everyone laughed at the optimism of 50 more years, but they all raised their glasses and drank to the couple who had become a legend in Holbrook, the story of the cowboy who found his true love half frozen in a snowstorm. Marigold stood as well, though her knees protested a bit. "Zachary Irving, you saved my life 50 years ago, and you have made every day since worth living. I was lost and alone, with nothing and no one, and you gave me everything. You are the best man I have ever known, and I count myself blessed every single day to be your wife. I love you today as much as I did on our wedding day, maybe even more because I have 50 years of reasons now. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this beautiful life. There was not a dry eye in the room as the couple kissed, their love still evident after half a century together. They were given a few more good years, years filled with watching their grandchildren grow, years of quiet contentment and continued companionship. Zachary's health began to fail when he was 82, his heart growing weaker. He died peacefully in his sleep one winter night, Marigold lying beside him as she had for 54 years, holding his hand even in death. The grief nearly broke her. After more than 5 decades of rarely being apart, the emptiness without him was overwhelming. But she was surrounded by family, by children and grandchildren who loved her and supported her through the darkest days. And she found comfort in her memories, in the knowledge that she had been truly, deeply loved for most of her life. Marigold lived another 4 years after Zachary's death, staying in the home they had built together, surrounded by reminders of their life. She spent time with her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the ranch, about the old days. She continued to help with the ranch accounts, keeping her mind sharp even as her body grew frail. On a winter evening very much like the one on which Zachary had died, Marigold passed away in her sleep at the age of 82. Her children found her the next morning, peaceful in her bed, a slight smile on her face. On the bedside table was an old photograph of her and Zachary on their wedding day, young and full of hope and love. The funeral was huge, with people coming from all over Arizona to pay their respects. The story of Zachary and Marigold had become part of Holbrook's history, a tale told and retold about true love and second chances, and the power of being in the right place at the right time. They buried Marigold next to Zachary in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town, their headstones side by side for eternity. Zach, now 64 and running the ranch with his own son, stood looking at his parents' graves and thought about the legacy they had left behind. It was not just the ranch, though that was substantial. It was not just the family, though that was precious. It was the example they had set, the way they had loved each other through everything, the life they had built from nearly nothing. His father had found his mother half dead in the snow and had saved her life. But in doing so, he had found his own salvation, his own purpose and joy. Their love story had started with a desperate walk through a winter night, a collapse in the snow, and a cowboy who happened to ride by at exactly the right moment. It had continued through courtship and marriage, through children and grandchildren, through 54 years of partnership and devotion, and it had ended only when death had finally parted them, first one and then the other, following into whatever came next. But the love itself, Zach thought as he stood between their graves, the love would go on forever. It lived in the ranch they had built, in the family they had created, in the stories that would be told about them for generations. It lived in the values they had instilled in their children and grandchildren, in the example they had set of what a good marriage looked like. The sun was setting over the Arizona landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were lowing. The wind carried the scent of sage and creosote, those familiar smells of home. Zach placed a hand on each headstone, saying a silent farewell, though he knew it was not really goodbye. His parents lived on in him, in his siblings, in all the lives they had touched. Their story was complete, beginning to end, a tale of love and survival and the beautiful life that could be built when two souls found each other against all odds. As he walked back to his horse, Zach thought about that night so many years ago when his father had found his mother in the snow. What were the chances? What twist of fate had put Zachary on that particular path at that particular moment? It seemed like magic, like destiny, like proof that sometimes the universe conspired to bring the right people together. He mounted his horse and rode back toward the ranch house, toward his own wife and children waiting for him. The legacy continued, generation after generation, all flowing from that one frozen morning when a cowboy had found a young woman collapsed in the snow and had warmed her by his fire. And in doing so, he had warmed both their lives forever.